But a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I have walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, it's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewberry. Tonight, the National Conservatism Conference. Let me ask you this. Do the Tories need to change direction? What should that direction be? And what about all these protesters shouting fascism? Are they right? What do they even mean? And EU citizens, 16-year-olds, should they be allowed to vote in general elections? Yes or no? 10 miles an hour, is that the speed that you should have to drive your car at? 30, 20, 10? Wouldn't surprise me, if they got rid of them altogether and made it walking only. And Ukraine's Zelensky is in town. He is asking for more support. Should we give it to him? If so, where is the line? Is there one at all? We'll have it all coming up. But before we do, let's get ourselves the latest news headlines.
Michelle, thank you, and good evening to you. The top story today, the Home Secretary has defended the government's plan to cut net migration, saying it isn't racist to want to control our borders. In a speech, Suella Braverman argued that mass and rapid migration is unsustainable and would be a burden on housing and public services. And she says the UK should be focused instead on creating highly skilled workers at home.
The labour market has acute or structural shortages, as with the NHS, it is of course right that we should have an immigration system agile enough to plug those shortages. But we need to get overall immigration numbers down. There is no good reason why we can't train up enough truck drivers, butchers, fruit pickers, builders or welders. Brexit enables us to build a high-skilled, high-wage economy that is less dependent on low-skilled foreign labour.
Well, the Home Secretary's speech was in fact disrupted halfway through. Minutes after the Home Secretary began, a man stood up in protest, and then later a woman also interrupted the speech, heckling the Home Secretary before she, like he, was removed from the chamber. Now, the UK is to train Ukrainian pilots to fly Western fighter jets, but it has no plans to provide them with planes. At a meeting at Chequers today, the Prime Minister told President Zelensky that providing warplanes wasn't straightforward. But Rishi Sunak did promise further air defence missiles and drones on condition they were used only over Ukrainian soil.
One thing we will be doing, starting actually relatively soon, is training of Ukrainian pilots, and that's something that we've discussed today. We're ready to implement those plans in relatively short order, which will mean that we're training Ukrainian citizens to become absolutely combat-ready aircraft pilots.
Well, President Zelensky thanked the Prime Minister, saying air power and fighter jets were an important issue for his country's defence.
Today we spoke about the jets. Very important topic for us, because we can't control the sky, you know it. So I think you know everything deeply, because we're real partners. Rishi knows all the details, what's going on our battlefield. Thank you very much. And we want to create this jets coalition, and I'm very positive with it.
Now, a ballot on strike action by senior doctors in England has opened. That's after the British Medical Association said talks with the other governments over the long-running dispute is in deadlock. But the Health Department is urging those striking to seriously consider the effect that further walkouts will have on patients. The ballot will close at the end of June. And the Royal College of Nursing says nurses fear being taken to court over the level of care they give to patients. Union says more than 9 out of 10 nurses raise concerns that patients may be receiving unsafe care due to their working conditions. Some nurses have described feeling even suicidal as they deal with patients in corridors, which they say downgrades patients. Now, a former Met police officer allegedly missed an opportunity to properly investigate Wayne Couzens before he murdered Sarah Everard. Samantha Lee is said to have failed to make the correct investigative inquiries over 2 incidents when he exposed himself to female staff at a restaurant in Kent. It's claimed there were issues with witness statements and evidence, and her investigative work was allegedly rushed. Miss Lee is said to have breached Force's standards on duties and responsibilities, which she denies. The hearing is expected to last 7 days. And the police watchdog is investigating after an 11-year-old boy was tasered at a holiday park in Scotland. Police were called to a caravan park near Ayr just after 11 o'clock on March the 22nd. The boy, who was holding a knife, fell to the ground after being tasered by police. Police Scotland say the incident has been referred to the Police Investigations and Review Commissioner. Royal Mail could be fined after failing to meet its delivery targets in the last year. Ofcom says the company fell short of its performance targets for the first and second class categories of mail delivery. The regulator says the pandemic can no longer be cited as an excuse. Royal Mail says that improving its quality of service is now a top priority. And lastly, the average monthly rent on newly let homes across Britain was £125 higher in April than it was at the same time last year. That tallies up to an extra £1,500 more each year. According to property agent Hamptons, the average rent paid for newly let homes reached over £1,200 a month in April, that figure being a new high. Those are your latest news stories. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and the TuneIn app. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Thanks for that, Polly. I'm Michelle Dewberry with you till 7, alongside me, Joe Phillips, the political commentator, and Connor Tomlinson, the writer and podcast host. What about you guys at home joining the conversation tonight? gbviews@gbnews.uk is my email, or you can tweet me at gbnews. Before I get into the whole menu of topics for tonight, though, I just want to ask you, excuse my kind of scrunched up version of this because I couldn't walk past it on my way in. Did you see this image over the weekend? Absolutely, it just incredible, amazing. I tweeted it out earlier on as well. It was the marathon scene at the weekend where the friend of Rob Burrows carried him over the finishing line. It really did touch me, of course, for motor neuron disease, awful, cruel disease. And it was just a heartwarming image. If you haven't seen that footage, I implore you to check it out, because huge respect for all of them, quite frankly, the work they're doing to raise awareness of that condition. I wish them all the very best.
Here, Michelle.
Oh, thank you, Joe. Hey, pause, everybody. Look at this. We're getting off. We're starting the show off agreeing, Joe.
No, but that is amazing. I mean, that is... And I think it's Kevin Seinfeld, isn't it?
Yeah.
Who has done so much to raise hundreds of thousands of pounds. It's really moving.
I know, and it is just such an incredible story. I mean, there's been documentaries and things done on Rob and his family, and they're just such an incredible family. His kids came out to the line, his wife did it as well, and it's just so heartwarming. I'll shut up because I'll burst into tears. I'm so rubbish at stuff like this. Honestly, I'll cry.
It's friendship, isn't it?
It is. It's friendship. It's such an important matter, and we all fall out politically and disagree with some of the stuff, and lots of us struggle in life and all the rest of it. And sometimes you see something, it stops you in your tracks and just makes you kind of reflect on life. Anyway, so proud of all of them, and I think they're doing great work in raising awareness as well. Right, let's talk politics though, shall we? Let's move on. If you'll indulge me with that. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, of course, she's been speaking at the National Conservatism Conference. It's a big get-together here in London. It was opened this morning by Jacob Rees-Mogg. He was criticising the government basically for not being ambitious enough on Brexit. He went into childcare as well, saying that the extended provisions in the last budget are so-called anti-conservative. Connor, you was actually there at that conference.
Yeah, I've come fresh from it, yeah.
What was you doing there?
Just
speaking,
observing. No, having a chat, yeah. Enjoying all the guests. I have a couple of friends in the sphere who were on panels, so they actually got a very warm reception compared to Suella Braverman's. So it was quite interesting to watch. The first half of the day, it was opened by Miriam Cates as well, who is pretty much from my side of the sphere, backbencher of the year, particularly her recent proposal to say we should empower mothers to be able to stay at home and give their kids the best quality of life. And that's what she was hitting on. And then it went from that to a discussion about Britain in the biopolitical age and how we are increasingly seeing the state intervene in our lives to give us more and more in terms of benefits, but make us less connected to each other, atomising ourselves from a sense of community. And undergirding all of that was the idea that liberalism has gone too far. That was pretty much everyone's opinion, that they've promised us material prosperity, but our lives have less meaning than ever. Came back after the break, Suella Braverman came in, and I don't want to say she went down like a cup of cold sick, because that was a bit severe, but she starts...
She's as bad as my cup of tea that someone brought me earlier on. If you'd have heard me whinging about that.
I think she had slight more strength than that, particularly when dealing with the protesters. But she came off, and off the bat, she was talking about how conservatism in Britain means equality of opportunity, liberal values, and that we speak to a kind of universal sense of what being a human being really is. And it...
What's wrong with that?
Because it's not conservatism, it's liberalism.
Right.
And what's happened is people have said, OK, more liberalism is not the answer to the problems that liberalism has created. And that was the
So you're saying Suella Braverman's not Tory enough?
Yeah.
Cool, blimey. Joe, your thoughts?
Well, I think let's put this into context first, and correct me if I'm wrong. This is it's not a Conservative Party conference.
No.
It's run by an American think tank, the Edmund Burke Institute, and a lot of this sort of quite religious, Christian, fundamental, the Miriam Coates stuff, Jacob Rees-Mogg suggesting maybe that, women should stay at home and look after their children rather than use childcare, and Miriam Cates going on about sex education in schools. It's fine. If I was running the Conservative Party, which is pretty unlikely, having done so disastrously badly in the local elections, I'd actually want to sit down with my party, my members, my colleagues, and say, right, what are we getting right? What are we getting wrong? Because clearly they're not getting through to the electorate, or they certainly weren't in the local elections, and they keep reheating and rehashing things that aren't really policies, they're just random things, you know, cultural wars, wars on woke, Suella Braverman talking about immigration, yet again.
But those things are very... You'll call them like random issues. They are very important to a lot of people.
What? Sorry, hang on. You're speaking outside the base, though. Like, you don't actually know what the Conservative base care about, and that is the primary issue.
The Conservative base gave us Liz Truss, which cost all of us an awful lot of money.
Okay, that's just not true, though, because
Liz
Truss was not solely responsible for the economic crash. The bond market was about to collapse right before it happened, and they blamed it on the 1% tax cut.
was voted in by Conservative members.
As opposed to Rishi Sunak.
Well, he was voted in by Tory Conservative MPs.
Yeah, because the membership.
But the point is, you look at the results in Dover, for instance, which is at the front line of the small boats, that area, same as Thanet. Craig McKinley was on Patrick's programme just a little while ago. Those places both voted out Conservative councils and voted in Labour. It is not what people are talking about on the doorstep. So what I'm saying, and you're right...
But what was the turnout?
That's what I was about to say, because about 6 in 10 voters for Boris
I don't know.
have
Off the top of my head, I don't know, Michelle, but I think it was around about 30%, which is about average for local elections. But you're right up to a point, Connor, that, yes, it is Conservative members, but that's why I think they shouldn't be doing it in public, because I don't think this is helping them. You know, have a conference, by all means. Discuss all these ideas. All political parties do. Think tanks do. You know, there are conferences like this all over the place. I shall be at one in June in York. You know, there are lots of places for these things, but I think everything is so very toxic, and what I think we're seeing is a manoeuvring as to who's going to take over from Rishi Sunak.
Well, you was there. Do you think it was toxic?
No, it was very constructive, actually. And I think the reason you think it's toxic is because for the last 30, 40 years, there's been a neoliberal Blairite consensus paradigm where we're moving in one direction, and both parties have bought onto it. They're just arguing over the speed of travel. That's why within the tent, and even among some of the MPs, they were saying our party's pretty much indistinguishable from the Labour Party in terms of where we want to go. It's just how much we want to spend getting there. And so I'm not surprised that you think that this is inappropriate or toxic, because you're part of that consensus. The people that are at that conference want a radically different view.
You don't know what I'm part of, actually.
Well, you're formerly Liberal Democrat, right?
I was, yes. I'm not a member of the Conservative
Party. But you're saying, for example, that
other...
immigration and the culture wars are not chief concerns, whereas
they're not.
For us, they definitely are.
But for you, within a small part of the Conservative Party...
I think you overstate how small it actually is, and I think that's why many people are checking out of politics, because they don't feel substantially represented by the members that are in Westminster.
But what's happening is that this is not helping the Conservative Party by seeing, you know, whether this is a move further to the right, who can be more right-wing than the next lot.
Well, can I check, what do you call right-wing? Because what we were just talking about a second ago is incentivising family units. We were talking about people doing entry-level jobs in some cases when perhaps they're currently not incentivised to go out and work. So those kind of things, managing your borders, what do you determine to be right-wing?
Well, I think things like, you know, extending childcare and saying that's anti-conservative.
But wasn't he saying...
Because, so what you're doing, specifically for Jeremy Hunt, is you're making it so that motherhood is an enterprise that must register on the state's GDP balance sheet. Because no money's changing hands, it means the graph doesn't go up year on year. And because they can't actually incentivise families, because mass immigration has pushed down reasons for innovation in technology, we're not actually getting proper sustainable economic growth. So instead they're trying to bring more and more enterprises in the things that they can put on a sheet. And it's not conservative, because it doesn't say, OK, what's best for the child? It says, what's best for the government and their spreadsheets.
Right. So what do you think? That women should stay at home and look after children?
Yes. But that's
really?
If they have the children,
Do you know what? We're in 2023.
I don't care about current year. I'm sorry.
Right.
I don't... It doesn't matter.
And this is what's worrying, that this is this American imported...
It's not an American import. Hang on. You've got no.
Fundamentalist, stay-at-home, motherhood
whatever you like, but
pie.
the burden of proof is on you, because the mass daycare industry is a recent innovation versus how human beings have been biologically and historically raised. And what's best for the child... Great example. There's a meta-analysis...
Do you have children?
Not yet. I'd really love to. I really would.
And you'll expect your partner, if she's a woman, to stay at home and look after the children?
The partner I would pick would want to stay at home with the children.
Would they? OK.
Yes.
Michelle, you and I should go home, because clearly we shouldn't
I'm not saying women shouldn't work
hang on, because that's not what he said. And I do just want to come in here. So I'm a mum of a 2-year-old, my viewers know this, and I work full-time and I want to work. It doesn't make me less committed to my son. I'm a very committed and loving mum, and that's my choice. But I do recognise, actually, that there are a collection of women that want to stay at home. And I do think, actually, that as woman, you know, I am a youngish woman. I'm not as young as you, but I'm a youngish woman. And I do think there's part of my generation that has been sold, you're equals, you can go work, you can put off having your kids until you're in your 40s. And then you've got this whole collection of women that have gone out there, they've strived to be equal to men. And now it's catching up with them because they're hitting their 40s, they can't get pregnant, they're struggling.
Yeah.
So I do think, actually, sometimes, particularly religion, I'm not religious for the record, so I don't want to mischaracterise myself, but I do feel a little bit like traditional Christian values, traditional family units, they are like looked down on a little bit, almost for this poisoned chalice of equality and all of the rest of it. So I'm keen that we don't kind of dumb down one side of it in order to elevate others, because they're all different.
No,
right?
and I completely take the point, and people should have the choice, but they shouldn't be prevented from having that choice. And most...
But are you seeking to prevent? So if I was, I mean, I'm not going to marry you. Sorry to break your heart, and I'm sure you can marry me.
Utterly gutted.
But if I was married to you and I said to you, actually, I've got this great opportunity presented to myself, and I want to go out and fulfil it, would you be saying to me as your wife, no, stay home and raise your child?
I would hope that you would want to stay home and raise the children more. So a great example as to why, there's a meta-analysis in Science, I can't remember which magazine it might. Science, check me, I'll post it afterwards on Twitter. They looked at blood cortisol rates for children who were raised at home with their parents, or the daycare they were put in with their grandparents, it was only part-time.
Where was this study done, and over how many years and how many children?
It was a meta-analysis. I'll post the link afterwards, right? So just off the top of my head, I can't remember the exact number. But they looked at a bunch of different countries and daycare settings, and they found that blood cortisol levels for children that were put in daycare from early childhood, their rates of stress hormone remained high throughout their adolescence, whereas the rate where babies were kept at home dropped over the course of the day because they had close contact with their mother specifically. It's just small things like that that people don't think of.
Then how is it that we are, and we've discussed this on this programme before, how is it that we know for a fact that young children, little children who were kept away from nurseries and interaction during COVID and lockdown are now really struggling, not just at school and in reception, but also in the daycare, the nursery setting, because they haven't been sharing, they haven't been interacting, they haven't been touching people. So that doesn't actually make a lot of sense.
I can answer that.
But the other thing is...
Let him answer that one.
But the other thing about childcare is that most people cannot afford to pay a mortgage or rent on just one salary.
I agree. The entire economic system is terrible at the moment, and it disincentivises you having a family. That's why about 80% of the women who are childless by the time they cannot have them actually said they wanted children at one point in their life, but they never found the right partner, or the economics never lined up. It's not because of infertility or them not wanting children. So all the economics incentives are against it, particularly for my generation. It's awful. On the first point, part of the reason of that is because we've outsourced for so long the ability for parents to raise their children and also educate them because of the state education system. Most parents are not equipped to homeschool. That lots of parents dropped the ball and they didn't feel they were capable of providing the same level of education as a strict curriculum. So, of course, it's going to be difficult for parents now, who have learned a completely different way, to go from sticking their kids in a nursery to try and raise them at home. But that's still the optimum environment.
Well, I'm going to let you have the final say at home. What do you think? And also, by the way, when we talk about child development, I'm itching because I do have to go to break, but I can't not get it off my chest. I think what people did to children during COVID was shameful, and it wasn't just the closure of nurseries. It was the removal of pretty much everything, all your social activities. If you was engaging with healthcare professionals, I mean, good luck if you even managed to get your hands on one of those, but if you did, they had these stupid masks over their face, interacting with babies and toddlers where you couldn't even see their face. I think it's absolutely shameful what we did in terms of child development during those COVID years. Anyway, don't get me started. Any viewers, regular viewers, will know my thoughts on it all. Quick break. When I come back, let's talk voting, shall we? Do you think it should be extended to EU nationals and 16-year-olds when it comes to general elections? See you in 2.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Dewbs Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, alongside me Joe Phillips, the political commentator, and Connor Tomlinson, the writer and podcast host. Oh, we just continued our debate into the break, so we did. That whole conversation about who should be raising children, and what about those all societal kind of setups, if you like, those old ideals of the man was the breadwinner and the provider. He took care of his family. The woman had that home role where she protected and cared for the home, all of the kind of housekeeping and all the rest of it. Is society better now? Was it better then?
I think we should ask the women in Iran or Afghanistan who are not even allowed to go to school.
We should ask the women of my generation who are pretty miserable about the fact that they can't have children at this age. Because I've spoken
They can. They can make that choice if they want to.
The economic pressures are completely against that because the feminists have expanded the tax base to 2 people and, sorry.
Well, do you know what I believe? I'll tell you what I believe in. Choice, and what I think is what is the right setup for one family isn't necessarily the right setup for another family. Everyone has their own experiences, value sets, belief systems and whatever, but I do think we've got to be careful sometimes that people do look down on the choices of others, and of course there'll be a lot of people, perhaps single mums or whatever, screaming at their set saying, Michelle, I'd love to stay at home with my children, but the fella did a runner, and now I've got to say it works both ways. You can't just expect women to be all these lovely childbearing people and then guys wandering off, leaving mums behind.
I am very happy to make sure that blokes do not do that. I think they're pathetic if they do.
There you go,
Sometimes you need to get a shot of them, actually.
Shot of who?
the blokes.
Oh, cool, blimey, that's like Dewbs After Dark, that one. We'll come back to that one on a future episode. Catherine
Dewbs After Dark, that's
yeah,
an
Dewbs
idea.
After Dark. You should see some of the goings-on after 7 o'clock. I tell you, it's interesting. Catherine says, sorry, I do disagree with your lady presenter, Jo. I can't understand why anyone would want a baby, then put them into nursery care to spend their day with strangers. To me, it's so sad. I am one of those ladies, and as I said, it's all personal choice. Lydia says, bravo, Connor. She says, I wanted nothing more than to be with my children. And in the end, I did manage to stop working, and it was the best time of my life. Ray says, ask yourself a question, everyone. Is society better today than it was years ago when most mums stay at home? Keith says, I don't understand why anyone would want someone else to bring up their child. You cut your cloth accordingly and raise them yourself. Richard says, conservatism is small state, free markets, pro-aspiration, bring back Thatcherism, he says. And lastly, Paul says, one person should always stay at home to care for the family, but that person could be either the mum or the dad. There you go. I'll leave you to ponder that one. I don't think we will resolve it anytime soon. Keir Starmer, he's been basically speaking out in terms of who should get the votes. He would like to see it potentially expanded to EU nationals as well as 16-year-olds. Basically, he says, giving people, EU citizens that have been here for many years, the right to cast a vote is, I quote, common sense. Is it, Jo?
He said people who have been here for decades, who have settled status. So he's not talking about people who've been here for a few years. And at the moment...
Decades? Decades?
Decades, yeah.
Not in America.
Sorry.
Decades. They've been here so long, they've decayed.
Decayed, yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So he's not, and it's an idea that is being thrown out there to be discussed. The idea for, don't forget that people can, if they're resident here, they can already vote in local, mayoral and police and crime commissioner elections. The only elections they can't vote in are parliamentary elections.
Do you think 16-year-olds, for example, should be able to vote in Parliament? Do you?
Yes.
Why?
Why not?
Because they're not cognitively all there yet, and I think we should probably have a standardised age of adulthood, and 16 is far too low.
I know loads of 40-year-olds that are not cognitively all there, I'll be honest.
That's a fair point. It's somewhat arbitrary, but we should have a flat blanket line for...
OK, and where would you put that flat blanket line?
OK, I think 18's fair. Somewhat arbitrary, but...
It's totally arbitrary.
But when you say it's arbitrary, 18 is the age where you are almost technically defined as an adult in this country, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's where you can go out and, God, you can't even drink alcohol, for example, until you're 18 in a bar or a pub or a restaurant. So that would be the age of kind of when you're tried as an adult, for example, legally.
My feeling is, and I've spent most of my working life trying to get people engaged in politics. And as you know, I wrote a book about it. I've worked with the Home Office on youth engagement programmes under various governments. And young people are very interested in politics. A lot of young people don't know how anything works because we don't offer sufficient education, except for the ones that are a little bit sort of geeky, a bit nerdy, who might get involved and have a good teacher at school. And I think the younger that people are and start voting, the more seriously they take it. There are too many people who don't vote. It is something that is fundamentally such an important part of our place in being able to shape our world and the world in which we live.
Connor?
And I think that young people have got as much a right to cast their vote as somebody of 40 or 50.
Oh, I'll say something that gets me in trouble. I think there's probably too many people that do vote. I think probably one vote, one household at this point would be a
Good Lord,
be a bit
that
better.
would be no women. You'll be going back to the
that's not
only
at all.
working men. I bet you will.
I didn't say that.
No,
I
but
said
I
one
bet it's
vote,
not
one
far off.
household,
Yes.
so you can pull them together. Incentivises responsible
Why?
choice.
What's the logic in that?
Because, OK, perfect example with the 16-year-olds, right? All you're going to get is voting blocks of people that vote themselves more money. And that's the reason they want to...
you're not.
Absolutely. You're
But
going to
what
get...
about
16-year-olds are about on the cusp of going to university. They're going to vote for more free tuition.
You want one household to have one vote for that household.
That'd be better, yes.
So who's going to decide how everybody in that household votes?
It can be a negotiation. I thought
Really?
men and women were equal. You've been a feminist all your life. Therefore, we should be equal partners in
But what
franchise.
about the younger people who might be living at home? The grown-up
As in
children,
the
18-year-olds, as they might
Well,
be at the
hopefully
moment.
they'll be able to fly the nest at some point, but
Well,
we
I
need to
doubt it, 'cause they
restructure.
can't
Well, we need
afford
to exactly. So we need to restructure house policy. It's going all the way down. But anyway, going back to the point about the 16 and 17-year-olds. One, they're not particularly. They might be interested. They're not particularly informed.
Well, you can inform people through education.
Okay.
They have the vote in Scotland and they have the vote in
I know,
Wales.
but Jo, don't you think in school they've got enough to be teaching kids? You know, these days, and you know, you've got so many kids that can barely even read or write. So when it comes to what you educate schools within the kids within the schools,
well, actually, quite a lot of primary schools do engage in the sort of making choices. So let's have a vote, children, on what we're going to do. Oh, most people have decided that, so that's what we're going to do. That's a very basic, simple thing. Young people get very engaged. I mean, I work with Debating Matters and a lot of those sort of youth organisations, and people are passionate. They've got as much right to have a say in their
They can have emotions.
Right, so can I just ask you this? If you two live together,
yes.
I'm not being ageist or anything, but let's just say Jo's your mum, you have to live with her, you want to go Tory, she want to go to Lib Dem, and it's one vote per household.
Who's going to decide?
Who's going to decide?
And why should I tell you, or why should you tell me?
Because you're the homeowner, so you'd be putting me up in bed and board, so of course you'd have the entitlement.
Right.
If I wanted my own vote, I'd have to do
the
well.
homeowner, so these non-working women...
I'm not saying make it predicate on the home ownership. I'm saying I'd have to defer to you, because... No. I'm saying in a relationship, if I were living with you, I'd have to defer to you, because otherwise I'd feel entitled to participate in something that I'm not contributing to, and that would be wrong. That's perfect. You can't even...
But what about when someone's a contributing taxpayer?
Yeah.
So they are, ultimately, they are funding this democracy and how it operates and what it spends its cash on. It is your money that these people are spending. So you're spending your tax money. Surely you would want to say on that.
I think we should have a hell of a lot less tax money spent, to be fair. But, OK, we can maybe make it a little bit negotiable. But I'm operating off the principle, for example, that the family and the household is the primary unit of engagement, not the individual. The reason that this is being encompassed to more and more groups is because they're believing that the individual is the primary unit. The individual will always vote themselves more money, specifically...
No, they won't.
OK, since more people have been enfranchised, state spending's gone rocketed up.
Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that is to do with voting things. State spending has gone up for a variety of reasons. Well, look at the money that's been poured down the drain during COVID.
I agree, yeah.
On, crony deals and things.
I totally
look at the
agree.
money's been poured into HS2.
But we're talking about,
for instance,
which parties are being voted for. It's usually the parties that are promising people in times of crisis, and crises therefore have an incentive to be ginned up, providing for you, right? This is why the welfare state was voted in and things like that. So the reason that we have this is because specifically Labour, who are a socialist party, think which voting bloc's going to be most likely to vote for us. They're the voting blocks that are going to vote themselves more financial security. OK, what's that? Kids about to go off to university and people that have recently arrived and want a foot up on the ladder. Because I guarantee if they start saying, OK, people have been here for a while and they might be able to vote, they're going to say asylum seekers next.
Cool, blimey. I'm going to live on my own, and then that way I could maintain my votes, but I don't even turn out. I wouldn't vote out.
No, you don't.
I wouldn't go out and vote, I have to say, because I am a little bit disengaged at the moment with politics, so I don't know what you do with me. Maybe I could pass my vote to my next-door neighbour of the Connor system. I know you would. Well, good luck with that. In fact, actually, I'll come back to that in a second. But
bring down the age, but make it compulsory.
Yeah, good luck with you trying to make me go and do something that I don't want to do.
You can
That'd be
spoil your
fascinating.
ballot tape paper.
How are you going to get me there?
Do a postal vote.
How are you going to make me do that?
Works for Australians. They get fined if they don't.
Well, I'm not in Australia, luckily for me, and nor do I live with Connor. Double luckily
Neither
for me.
do I.
Anyway, your thoughts on it all. GB Views at gbnews.uk. Let's talk speeding. 10 miles an hour. Should that be the speed limit? Goodness me. See you in 2.
Sorry.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, keeping you company until 7 o'clock tonight. Joe Phillips, the political commentator, alongside me, as is Connor Tomlinson, the writer and podcast host. We're having some radical ideas thrown out tonight, everybody. One vote, one household. Where would you stand on that? Oh, I dread to think anyone... Well, actually, part of me would think, oh, actually, do you know what? Just vote on my behalf. Can't be bothered anyway.
I think it's absolutely appalling. I honestly...
I thought you believe in free choice.
I do, but that's
women
not...
being equalised.
But that's not free choice.
What,
one
me
vote,
deciding that
one...
I don't want to vote?
Oh, no, you can decide not to vote, but the one household thing.
Oh, right, right.
I think it's shocking.
Is there anybody out there that does agree with one household, one vote? I'm interested. Get in touch and let me know. The age of 16, Nigel says, you can't even drive when you're 16, so why would you be allowed to vote the impact for the next 5 years of this country? Hey, you can't even get a tattoo. You cannot even get a tattoo until you're 18 in this country. Let's talk driving restrictions, shall we, and speed limits in residential areas. Labour MP Rachel Maskell, she's saying she wants councils to introduce speed limits of 10 miles an hour. I mean, I would say you could walk quicker than that, actually, but it'd be a very fast walk, and I think you'd have a hard job. But to me, you know, was 30 down to 20, nudging it down to 10 if that goes ahead? To me, it feels a little bit like a war on cars, and it also feels like a little bit outdated, not least, because if you want to suppress cars, you've got to be careful, because in the rearview mirror, you're going to have e-scooters, which can go faster than your 10 miles an hour. You're going to have e-bikes. So therefore, it all just becomes a little bit odd. What do you make to it all?
Yeah, I agree with the frame nudge. I think this is sort of, and not that this proposal is gaining that much traction, but if it does, it's part of the behavioural nudge policy approach to inconvenience motorists off the road, whether that's because of climate concerns or whether it's because public transport is far more controllable despite the infrastructure being crumbling. We see that actually fairly recently, I think it must have been last year now, where they changed the highway code. And the reason they changed the highway code to allow cyclists to take priority and pedestrians over motorists is not necessarily for safety reasons, but it's because during the consultancy period, where most working people don't know that they're going on, and so their average experience as a driver can't be given in, the cycling lobby flooded it, and they were the overwhelming number of respondents. And when interviewed on other stations, loads of them from Stop Killing Cyclists or Car Free Cities campaign turned around and said, it's for the environment and the economy. Right, so abstract end goals rather than the actual experience of motorists and cyclists on the road.
Sure.
Well, just cast your mind, your imagination, Connor, into the ideal world where There is a woman at home with little children playing around her. She's got a pot of something cooking, homemade things. You're out at work earning money. Everything's hunky-dory. She'd like to let the children to go outside and play in the street, but they can't because there's too many cars. I mean, Rachel Maskell's idea is not Labour Party policy as far as I understand it. I think that we need to make built-up areas in cities, and she's an MP for York, so, and you and I know Canterbury very well, narrow streets. It is not, you know, they're medieval cities, they're not designed for cars, funnily enough. And I think it's quite a good idea if people can walk, kids can play, and they're not worried about being...
What, so would you pedestrianise?
I'd have much more pedestrian areas, yeah.
So if I'm indulging this little fancy now, so his wife, she's at home with all these kids, and now she needs to go get her food shopping.
She can't. She doesn't need to.
So now you've pedestrianised
So
now you've pedestrianised all the streets. So now she can't get her food shopping home.
But why would you need to go miles away? I mean,
because bigger supermarkets are cheaper than local independent stores.
Maybe one of the things about making cities more livable and towns more livable is that actually you reinvigorate a diverse economy. If you take cities where retail is gone and there are empty retail buildings and there's rooms and flats and space over the top of shops, if you turn those into apartments and places that are desperately needed, you'd have people living in cities, shopping in cities, you know, working and walking in cities, which would be much more vibrant than the towns and cities that we've got that are just ghost towns because retail's gone and nobody lives there.
I mean, I don't think it's a great idea to cram people in cities anyway, because population density is not particularly healthy for people psychologically. We aren't really meant to interact with that many people, and cities have far higher crime rates and things like that, no matter what. So I actually agree. We should probably pedestrianise cities a little bit better. Most of the time, we still need vehicles to move through to transport goods, sure. My problem is that the policy is not done towards making cities more livable for an aesthetic reason, a quality of life reason. Normally, the policies are done for climate outcomes, for example. That's just
I think it's for safety, and I mean, there are statistics that show that you are less likely to be seriously injured if you're hit at 20 miles an hour than 30 miles an hour.
What do you make to it? Can you see a future not too far away in the distance, actually, where there's no cars at all? It does feel to me that that is the way that we are tiptoeing. Would you celebrate that? Do you think it would be safety for the kids? Or do you think it's a little bit nanny state and a little bit too much control? Zelensky is in town asking for more. How much more should we be giving to Ukraine? Is there a line or not? See you in 2.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dewbs Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry alongside me, Joe Phillips, the political commentator, and Connor Tomlinson, the writer and podcast host. Now, Rishi Sunak has embraced, literally, I don't know if you saw it, good old little hug there. Zelensky, Ukraine's president, of course, in Chequers, that was earlier on. Long story short, there you go, a little man hug going on. Long story short, the list of requests has expanded once again. Joe Phillips, do you think there's any kind of limits to the UK in terms of support for Ukraine, whether it's money, whether it's military assistance, jets, long-range missiles, whatever the request is? Because whatever the request is today is going to be expanded upon tomorrow, let's be honest.
I think what Tobias Ellwood said earlier today, who's the chair of the Commons Select Defence Committee, Conservative MP, former army officer, and he said, we can't keep emptying the store cupboard. We need to work in a much more unified way with our NATO partners. And although, America has given squillions compared to what the UK has given to Ukraine, we have still given significantly more than quite a lot of other
we've
countries.
led the way in a lot of ways among Europe.
Yes, and I think that is great, and I think, of course...
Do you think that was our job?
I think it was important at the time, but I also think rather cynically you might say that President Zelensky is incredibly brave, he's incredibly charismatic, he's a great communicator, he's managed to, whiz round the world garnering support. And there is no doubt that, we've got this war on our doorstep, and we should have done something in 2014 when Russia went into Crimea and we didn't. So I think there's an element of doing, but I think we have to be aware of and the danger of the emotional commitment without being sometimes a little bit hard-headed about whether we should be better off working more strategically with partners.
I'd be even more cynical, actually, and I would suggest that the whole Ukrainian situation became almost like a political football with Boris Johnson using it as a way to deflect from domestic goings-on, if you ask me. Anyway, Connor, your thoughts on it all?
I would be worried about how long the war is going to be prolonged, not just in terms of escalation, but in terms of the vested interests who want it prolonged. Now, the amount of money that is flowing out of taxpayer coffers to the military-industrial complex just to give it over to Ukraine to defend themselves, and they're perfectly entitled to defend themselves, it does worry me that there's not going to be any end in sight, because it's very profitable for the people that have the ears of politicians but don't necessarily have the interests of the Ukrainian people who've been invaded, the Russian conscripts and citizens who never wanted it, and the taxpayers of Western nations who have to foot the bill for it at heart. It does concern me that we seem to have a no-limits level of commitment to this when it's going to make a lot of money for some very seedy people.
And we're not doing anything, on the same scale to help people in Sudan or Yemen or other places around the world. I do think it's a very difficult call. I have to say I agree with you. I wasn't going to mention Boris Johnson because of Boris Bingo, but you brought it up first. But I do think it suited him very well to be hailed a hero in Ukraine when things were getting a bit ropey back home.
I wouldn't call him a hero in this as well, because right from the off, there was a chance for peace negotiations and there were going to be some unsavoury compromises made there, but there's probably going to be at the end of this war when one side runs out anyway. And Boris specifically said to Zelensky, don't come to the negotiating table because we'll back you for as long as it takes. And frankly, even though people can say, OK, Russia shouldn't have Crimea and the Donbass regions, absolutely, the longer this has gone on, the more Ukrainian lives have been lost. So Boris Johnson's policy has actually killed people.
I do think it's fascinating when you hear the narrative around this now. This has become, you know, it's not Ukraine has to win the war, it's the West has to win the war. And it's like, well, hang on a second, how has that kind of happened? That we're in, Michael's have just been in touch saying, Michelle, we being the UK, are essentially at war with Russia in all but technical name. Is that fair?
Not precisely, but I think, you know, the West is at war with Russia, whether we like it or not, because this war is on our doorstep. And if Russia takes Ukraine, then where does it go next? You know, and that's why when we didn't do anything in Crimea, when there was plenty of intelligence to say that was going to happen and we stood by and let it happen, well, you know, the Russians have always played a long game. So we need for Russia to be defeated, whether that's at the negotiating table or militarily.
But what I found interesting is Donald Trump came out and he was saying about there needs to be more focus on not winning and losing, but more focus on settlement, settling, and basically bringing this to a close to stop death on all sides. He was immediately jumped upon and criticised, lambasted, and all the rest of it. And there doesn't, in my eyes, seem to be enough people pushing for the kind of settlement, resolution, whatever word you want to apply to it. And I found that particularly odd, but I think I interrupted a point you was going to make.
No, actually, I really like that point. And mainly the reason is Donald Trump doesn't have any vested financial interest in the war going on, but lots of the media companies, which are not this great channel, have large shares being owned by BlackRock. And BlackRock, the world's largest hedge fund, are currently securing loans for the Ukrainians. The longer the war goes on, the more interest the Ukrainians owe them, the more money that BlackRock makes. Again, not in the best interest of those people. Pretty worried.
I think the idea of Donald Trump being a peace broker is almost as bonkers as the idea of women staying at home and then having a one vote per household.
The thing is, right.
This is a man who can't even accept he lost an election.
Well, I think we shouldn't go into that there because it's going to be a whole other tangent. But point being...
Don't open a brand new tangent just before I need to say goodbye.
No, but Connor, he doesn't even accept the outcome of a legitimate election.
Well, it was dodgy, it wasn't legitimate. But anyway, point being, it absolutely wasn't. It wasn't.
So don't go massively off topic, though, because
I was going to say, hang on. Let me respond, because he intimidates people. That's frankly it.
That's a bully.
Yes, when you're dealing with Vladimir Putin, don't you want to bully Putin into defeat?
No, you need to negotiate properly.
Oh, OK, right, fine. But negotiate through strength. That is what kept Putin in check before, and the simple fact is he didn't advance on anything when Trump was in office. He did under Obama and Biden. And he knows as well the fact that, unfortunately, Biden has an interest in prolonging the war because his son sat on the Ukrainian gas board and he has a lot of money invested in the region, whereas Trump doesn't have the ties.
If they were in this country, I'd say that was libelous.
That's true. The New York Post have...
One of the things that worries me about all of this scenario is that actually, if you look at our military might, it is certainly not what it once was, whether that's personnel, whether that's stock, ammunition, whatever it is. And I do worry that actually a government's primary responsibility is to making sure that us here in this country are safe. Mick says, thank God Churchill didn't have the attitude of your lot in 1939. Ukraine is fighting for its very existence and deserves all of our support. Why should they seek peace until Russia withdraws from their sovereign territory? The thing that's got lots of you guys talking again tonight, though, is whether or not mothers should be stay at home. Mums, I've got to say, Joe, so many people, so many women actually disagreeing with you, saying that they did stay at home, they would stay at home. That's a choice that they were superbly proud of.
That they were able to.
Well, there you go, you guys. She says, count yourself lucky. That's all I've got time for. It flies when you're having fun. Connor, thank you. Joe, thank you. Thank you at home. Have a wonderful night. Don't go anywhere. Nigel Farage is up next, and I will see you tomorrow.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather. It's going to turn quite chilly for the time of year tonight, possible grass frost, but it does mean we'll be mostly dry as we head into Tuesday. And the reason for this is this area of high pressure. Through the week, it generally stays near, if not over the UK, but at times it just moves away and allows weak weather fronts to topple in, largely affecting Scotland and Northern Ireland, and we could see a few showers. We've seen a few showers around today. They fade away as we head into the evening. As you can see, largely clear skies overnight, and with light winds we could see a touch of mist and fog, but we could also see the risk of frost in the countryside. So gardeners, beware for tender plants. There could be some patchy frost to start Tuesday morning, but plenty of sunshine. Thicker cloud and showery rain does move into parts of northern Scotland, and this sinks its way southwards through the day. Cloud bubbles up, so generally sunny spells or bright spells for many, but in between it won't be too bad, with light winds feeling quite warm, but the odd shower is still possible, particularly southern Scotland, northeast England, the odd heavy one possible, and temperatures generally mid to high teens, so around average for the time of year. A few showers still running down the eastern side of England as we head through the evening, but again clearing skies due to the area of high pressure. It will turn quite chilly, taking us into Wednesday morning. Thicker cloud approaching the far north of Scotland too as the next weather system moves in here. Temperatures, towns and cities generally holding up, perhaps a touch of frost again in the countryside for one or two prone spots to start Wednesday. And again, fairly dry, bright day, best of the sunshine across southern parts. Elsewhere, variable amounts of cloud, and then later on we'll see rain approaching the Highlands, and this slowly pushing south and eastwards across Scotland through the day. Drier and brighter Thursday and Friday for many, and temperatures also start to rise, reaching the low 20s.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation